there any reason for Nicky to think he'd done it?
What? Killed Hugh? I take my oath he didn't. We ate our temple dinners together before he became a painter. I know Nicky.
Yeah, so do I.
But then you'll know he didn't.
I tell you, I don't know.
What?
Oh, we're all friends of Nicky's here, real friends. But you were the only one of us with him that evening, Mason, with him all the time. You were at the inquest, too, afterwards on poor Hugh. We know the coroner's verdict, but tell us, what did happen?
Well, I'll tell you. Then you can decide for yourselves. Although I can't. The day the Huntsby case collapsed so dramatically, I found myself with a free evening for once. I was at a loose end, so I slipped into a grill room and dined alone. It was early when I'd finished, so I strolled into the Mall, wondering where to make for next, when I suddenly thought of Nicky. I hadn't seen him for ages, so I jumped into a taxi. You went to his rooms, didn't you, Winch?
They were in the same building as Hugh's.
Yeah, Hugh lived immediately above Nicky. His study was plumb over Nicky's sitting room. Now, remember that. It's important. Nicky had a man with him, Charlie Summers. I hadn't seen him before. Nice chap with a boyish smile. Well, Nicky was in great form. Apparently they'd been ragging Hugh and he'd got huffy, threatened to complain or something. He was like that. And finally, he turned them out and locked himself in. We three sat chatting about Nicky's latest picture. He'd just bought a new lay figure. Life-size thing it was, all jointed, and Nicky was very excited about it. Showed us how it worked and stuck it up in all sorts of poses. It's almost real. Presently, there was a ring at the bell. Nicky went to the door himself. It was a parcel left by some poor little wretch who'd lost his way and was crying. When Nicky came to look at the parcel, it wasn't for him at all. It was addressed to Hugh. In the dark, the boy had mistaken the numbers. Nicky thought it a great joke. He pictured Hugh waiting patiently for bed socks or a chest protector. Then Nicky had a brainwave. He suggested we should open the parcel and send Hugh some old boots and rubbish. And before we could stop him, he'd cut the string. In the paper was an old book, musty and yellow with age. He turned the pages over in disgust, couldn't read a word of it, passed it over to us. I thought it was Chinese, but Summers became quite interested and took the book on his knee. It's Sanskrit, he said, the ancient and sacred language of India. God, it's about devil worship. Devil worship, cried Nicky. I didn't know there was such a thing. Summers said that when he was in Bombay, some fakir told him wonderful things were done in the heart of the Himalayas by devil worshippers. Meanwhile, he was turning over the dog-eared pages. I say, he blurted out suddenly, this book's the very thing. Definite instructions for the practice of devil worship. It actually gives the formula for casting or projecting a man's soul out of his body. Nicky and I laughed. You don't mean to say you believe such nonsense? Well, I don't know, he replied. Shouldn't like to say, if half the old man told me was true. And he went on deciphering with Nicky looking over his shoulder. I say, Mason, said Nicky, let's have a séance or whatever they call it. Do a little devil worshipping for ourselves. Call up the old boy. What do you say, Charlie? Well, I thought Nicky was crazy and told him so. But once he gets an idea into his head, he's never satisfied until it's exploded. He began rearranging the room. Then he found a bundle of joss sticks, which he lit and stuck in vases round the room. Then the lights didn't suit him. Devils like gloom, he said. The next minute, we were in the subdued light from a standard lamp. Summers was taking the thing quite seriously, too. The book seemed to obsess him. He said, we must have some definite line of action, some object upon which to focus our attention, some body. And in a spirit of devilry, Nicky suggested Hugh. Yes, but where are we going to send his soul, worried Summers. Well, I could see what was on the tip of Nicky's tongue, but he didn't say it. His eyes were wandering round the room, searching for an idea, when he saw the lay figure. The very thing. We'll command Hugh's soul to come out and enter that. Wait a bit. I'll dress it up. Make it more realistic. More like... But he didn't finish what he was saying. A fierce enthusiasm caught him. I watched him feverishly bursting open drawers, dragging out trousers, waistcoat, jacket. He even buttoned a collar round the neck and knotted a black tie with flowing ends. Finally, he sat the figure up in a chair. He stepped back to survey it. But Summers put the finishing touch to it by seizing my glasses. balancing them on the end of the aquiline nose. The effect was uncanny. Of course, the clothes helped. Hugh always looked as if he'd got out of a rag bag, and the subdued lamplight encouraged one to imagine the foxy look in the glassy eyes. "We must form a circle and link hands," directed Summers. "I'll recite the formula from the book. It's only a few sentences, and we must all concentrate on Hugh, visualizing his soul leaving his body and entering the dummy." I still didn't like the idea. It seemed so childish, so bizarre. But I hadn't the courage to quarrel with Nicky. He was so desperately set on it. He danced over to my chair and pulled me up by the arms. "Come on, Mason," he cried. And in a skeptical frame of mind, I took their hands and we made a ring round the chair where the figure sat, stiff and solemn, and the séance commenced. After a few seconds, Summers began reciting something in a dreary monotone. Every now and then he stopped and we waited placidly for the chanting to go on again. But gradually, unconsciously, we began to get serious, in spite of ourselves. Our minds were fired with the idea. The atmosphere became mesmeric. A feeling of waiting and watching for something crept over us. The expectancy was almost painful. As it became tenser, I had a vague feeling of uneasiness. All sense of time and space vanished. I stole a glance at Nicky. His face was flushed with excitement. Suddenly, I felt him grip my hand tight. I turned sharply and saw he'd raised himself on his toes with his head half tilted upwards as if he were straining to hear something. Summers had come to one of his pauses when, without warning, there was a peal of fierce, maniacal laughter immediately above our heads. Just one peal, no more. Then a pulsating, awful silence. An icy fear went down my spine. It was such an inhuman sound, bloodless like a triumphant devil. I wanted to do something, make some physical movement. I wanted to shout, scream, anything, but I couldn't. And then something happened. Something we couldn't see but felt. Something that made us afraid with a sweating fear. Something came into the room. We became aware of another presence. We sensed it. That warning, creepy sensation all down your back of being watched by somebody you couldn't see. Afraid of being caught, I twisted my head and looked at Nicky. Then my blood froze. His face was distorted with horror, and his lower lip quivered convulsively. But it was the terror, the dying hope in his eyes that galvanized my sinking spirits. "Nicky, Nicky," I shouted. "Stop it! Stop it! Do you hear me? Stop it!" He shivered and passed his hand across his forehead. Then he started giggling, laughing and shrieking in the same diabolical way we'd heard from above. "It's Hugh," he raved. "Hugh, I tell you. He's here. There, look at him. He's grinning at me. The lay figure had fallen back in the chair with its head resting on the back, but turned towards Nicky. The right arm was raised. "I'll stop his gibbering," he yelled. "You see." And he darted back to the table and, snatching up a long steel paper knife, sprang towards the chair. But he must have caught his foot in the flex from the lamp, for the next instant the room was in darkness. I heard a scuffle, then short gasps, as I grovelled to find the switch. And when I turned on the lights, Nicky had his knee in the dummy's chest and, with blind savagery, drove the paper knife fiercely into its neck. Then he seized the figure and, with a passionate ferocity, flung it to the floor. Even as it fell, there was a second thud of something falling heavily on the floor above. Whatever we were going to say died in our throats. We made for the door, the three of us, but Nicky had previously locked it against intrusion. We flung it open, rushed up the stairs. We rang and hammered and kicked on the front door, but nobody came. Then Summers ran down again, and we knew he'd gone for the porter. Neither Nicky nor I spoke while we waited, but like frightened children, we felt for each other's hand. When they came back and we got into the little hall, we went straight to Hugh's study, but the door was locked on the inside. Bending down, we could see the key in the lock, yet there wasn't a sound from within. So we put our shoulders against the door. It gave after the fifth attempt, and I fell into the room. The light was on, but everything was disarranged, as if there'd been a struggle. And on the floor, just about where Nicky had thrown down the figure, was Hugh. Dead. Blood was slowly oozing from a wound in the neck, in the identical spot where the paper knife was sticking in the figure downstairs. But there was no knife or implement of any sort that we could find. and we still hadn't said a word to each other. Only Nicky whispered something to the porter, and he went away whilst we sat down quietly and waited for the police.